Did it give you a notification of it?
Recording
Recording
has
has
started.
started.
There we go.
All
Boom.
right.
Take 67. I love it.
Yeah. Oh, you want me to get this
Yeah.
to
This is your
interview
show.
you?
This
Oh,
is your
okay.
show.
Oh, okay. Well, great. I didn't know what perspective you were looking at it from. Well, Casey, it's good to have you here, and to be with you as well. And you briefly just started talking about our heart with marriage, and family, and with the church itself. Um, from your years of experience, tell us what are your passions when it comes to marriage and family, with counseling?
Mm. Yeah. Well, in the marriage relationship it is this beautiful reflection of God's love for us and how he wants to interact with us. You know, all like throughout his teachings, he's talking about this bride and the bridegroom. He's talking about the even in the end times, this future feasting together. That right now we're kind of in this engagement season where he's going to prepare a place for us, which is what would happen, right? The guy would go in
Yes.
town and go, "She's hot. Let me talk to her parents." And he'd say, "Listen, I am betrothing you, and I'm going to go build a property uh, on my father's a house on my father's property, blah, and I'm going to come back and pick you up." So
Mm,
throughout Scripture, there's this beautiful interaction of this man's attraction and wanting to woo this
mm,
beautiful bride. I'm just thinking about how even with Israel's betrayal, it was spoken of as adultery. Hosea, right, was used as an example to wed this woman who was wayward, but his love continues to pursue us. So when I think about a husband and a wife reconciling, there's something deeply spiritual happening. And I
right.
will say that there is something also deeply spiritual happening that keeps couples apart, because a beautiful marriage is this wonderful advertisement for what could be. And yet when we hear and we look at the marriages around us, like, I mean, what percentage of them are actually having fun? It seems to be a very, very small majority. I mean, if you think about 50% of marriages end in divorce or around there. I'm in
Hmm.
Orange County, so the divorce rate's one of the highest in the nation. It's 72%. Yeah, crazy. And and you think about, okay, so you got a 50-50 shot. Then of the 50% that actually stick it out, how many of them are just enduring it? How many of them are living like roommates?
Mm.
How many of them live in anger and resentment compared to how many people are actually having fun? So, anyways, I think that there's a war against the family that's
Mhm.
both culturally. I think there's a war against the family that's also deeply spiritual because, and I love this, marriage in the catechism is listed as a sacrament. A sacrament is a place where God is uniquely active. So
Yeah.
when we take the cup and we eat the bread,
Mhm.
you think about the literal nature of it, it's just bread and grape juice, guys. And yet, God is uniquely active in this. In baptism, we're putting someone into water. All right,
Yeah.
this isn't about making people wet and then really embarrassing them in front of people. No, there's something deeply spiritual happening. Well, you know what? Marriage is the same thing. Marriage is a place where God is uniquely active because he's revealing himself. And
Yeah.
so for my heart, the ministry of reconciliation
Mm.
actually takes a real tactical level. Like I can't I'm having this conversation with you and we're talking kind of like, big spiritual concepts. But when you work with a couple, what's really fascinating is you can't talk like that to them because then they're like, "Well, I'm still pissed off. So what am I supposed to do next?" So you
Yeah.
have to get really engaged and tactical with a couple by giving them tools, which is something that Megan and I really work hard on is like we're giving frameworks. We're giving Like when I think about tools on a tool belt, like, you know, you trying to ask somebody to build a house, but you give them a tool belt with no tools. And they're like,
Mhm.
how am I supposed to do that? So
Yeah.
we provide couples the hammers and the saws and the wrenches.
And I'm going to backtrack just a little bit to two things. Number one, just thinking those that just turned in and not knowing anything. This is Casey.
I'm
He and his wife, we never officially met. However, I met them and I started following them on Instagram with Marriage 365. So, real briefly, Casey, can you give us um, a overview of how that got started and what
sure.
was your vision for that?
Uh, well, I'll stop you there. It wasn't my vision. I
Okay.
will, and I'll explain more about that because I will tell you. No, we were talking right before you hit record. We were saying no one gets into marriage ministry unless they are called because it is a rough go at. No one wants to talk about it. There's big reason why there's a. I mean, we're single digit percentages of churches across America actually have a marriage ministry tab on their website.
Mm,
Single digits. So it is something where, like, when you dive into this topic, like, you have to confront your own marriage. And I think there's a lot of people that
yeah.
are hiding, running, and the last thing they want to talk about is that. I mean, it's easy to talk about kids in Africa or digging wells because
Yeah.
it's, hey, you don't have to look at me. We're just doing good, right? So, anyways,
Mm,
a little bit of soapbox there because I am trying to fight for attention on this topic. And here's why. So let me go back to our brief story sketches that my wife and I met in college. I was a freshman welcoming committee, and she was an incoming freshman, and the student ratio was 3 girls to every guy on our college. So let me just tell you, it was fish in a barrel. I see her, and I'm like, "Hey, you need a private tour." And I will tell you, dating was so much fun. It was
yeah.
all the fun stuff. It was all the feels. And we were like, this is incredible. Like, we should do this forever and ever and ever.
Mm.
And then we got married. And that's where things turn wildly. Like,
Yeah.
I was never an angry person. And once I got married, I was a very angry person. And between, Megan and I, like, by year 3, we hated each other. Like, looking for divorce attorneys, looking for ways out. We had no tools. We talked about tools, right? We had no models. Okay, so Joshua, my mom's been married 6 times. And between both sets of our parents, there's 12 marriages. Megan's dad had an affair and married the mistress and was on and off separated for like 3 or 4 years, right when she was 4 or 5 years, actually, when she was 13 till like 17. So talk about formative years where the family's fallen apart. There's just, we're both stubborn. We're both very
Hmm.
competitive. We're both leaders. Like, so when we fought, like, sparks flew. Like,
Hmm.
we had neighbors, like, slamming on our door, like, keep it down at 2 a.m. in the morning. So it was the anger and the hatred towards us were very palpable. And I believe that all of the repressed childhood wounds came raging out.
Mm.
Now here's the problem, Joshua. I was a youth pastor. I went to like a pastoral leadership college, and I was gearing to be a youth pastor. So on Wednesday nights, I would lead worship and I would teach high school kids the Bible. And then I would come home and I would cuss my wife out.
Hmm.
I was so ashamed, so afraid, because the culture in my church was if you were to raise your hand and say, I'm struggling, that would disqualify you from ministry.
Mm.
So what I got instead were Christian platitudes like, Casey, you just need to pray harder. And I was like, Jesus, change my wife's heart. Listen, Joshua, I am the worst husband to ever come on your podcast. I Like I am the worst. Listen, here's how bad it was. Megan and I are sitting down, first 2 years of prayer of our marriage. We're praying, and I interrupt her and I go, "Oh, Megan, that's not how you pray." She got up, she started crying, and she
I
walked out of the
see.
house. I
You're
was,
entering that worst husband I've ever had.
yeah. I mean, that's
I
so.
love
Listen,
it.
so I'm a horrible Christian. I'm a horrible husband, and Megan started to get help that turned things around.
Hmm.
And there's so much behind that. Her therapist, she went in, she started complaining. Her therapist said this: if you want to make a better marriage,
Yeah.
it starts by making a better you.
Yeah.
You can sit here and complain about Casey for a full hour.
Hmm.
That's not going to get you anywhere. Or we can
Yeah.
work on you. Now,
Hmm.
I made fun of her for going to therapy. I laughed at her on the way out the door. Again, amazing husband here. Let me just tell you. But I started to see a change in her
Hmm.
where she set up these healthy boundaries and she became someone that became like I saw this glow in her and it really became apparent who is the unhealthy spouse. And so, needless to say, we got our marriage back on track. And probably by year 8,
Hmm.
Megan woke up in the middle of the night and she woke me up and she said, I just had probably the most like unreal dream ever. And I don't know what it means. But God walked up to me and said, you and Casey are going to be the voice for marriage to this generation. To which I laughed at her. I said, there is no way in hell anybody is going to pay attention to this guy here who is a jerk to you,
Hmm.
who, the walls still could kind of talk, still
Yeah.
carried the words, the vitriolic, angry words
Hmm.
were still stuck in there. Like I knew all that. And it was like, how nobody's going to pay attention to us because we don't know anything. And I think there's some divine comedy to think that I'm sitting here talking to you today about marriage and knowing
Yeah.
my story and knowing like, how we started to post our story on social media and the calling that God said is basically, Casey, I want you to tell people how bad of a husband you were because that's going to bring me glory. I'm like, really? Seriously? Can I do anything else? He's like,
Hmm.
yep, I want you to talk about how bad it was. And
Yeah.
I realized that as I've shared my story, um, uh, you know, I really am sharing it to the Casey and Megan in year 1 or 2 because I needed someone to say, I'm struggling too, or
Hmm.
it's okay to struggle. And uh, frankly, get a little emotional because it's
Hmm.
that's 20 years ago, but I still feel that sense of shame. And if anyone's listening and feeling that shame, like I want you to know it, like the worst part of that is to feel alone at that moment, you know? And that right there, when we create content, I mean, we have a little avatar of like Casey and Megan, bleach tips, oversized leather jacket and all. Like looking at that kid in 2000 and realizing like this guy needed tools, right? This guy needed tools. He was lost. He didn't have any example and he needed care and compassion. So I just, to answer, wrap up the question, it was a calling. So there was definitely not a plan for Casey to be talking about marriage stuff on the dream board, but God is choosing to use the foolish things to bring
Oh,
glory. And
yes.
I say that about myself and still kind of go, really? Me? Sure.
That,
So,
and it's like you said too, two things within that. It's the beauty of salvation when you understand how Christ died for his bride. And us being the bride, we get so consumed on thinking that we have to be the white dress before we march down the aisle, but that's not the case. When we're coming into a relationship with Christ, he gets us and then he gets us right. And it's the same with the marriage. Like, you really want me to talk about a marriage? Well, yes, because that's how people are going to understand how I perfect them. It's not about your goodness, it's his
Yeah.
goodness
Oh,
that that's continuously running after us. After that, and just within you, I could see in your eyes, and I just wanted you to affirm in you the power of God and receiving the fullness of his love that covers your shame, because there should be no traces of shame walking in a continuous relationship with Christ. He did all of that on the cross. So for you to allow any amount of shame to even be in the thoughts of you, that chain can be is broken off of you, and you walk in the fullness of life knowing that, hey, I know who I am, and that's the past
yeah.
within it. But you also brought
I'll
up
receive
the
that.
good stuff of fun in a
Yeah.
marriage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think when when Megan and I brought our marriage, I mean, I think even when Marriage 365 started about 15 years ago,
Mhm.
we were still kind of healing. We were still working it out. We didn't have any
Yep.
frameworks. We didn't have any tools. So we really had to kind of dive into helping couples. And so once we kind of put our page up, people are like, "Hey, can you help us out?" We're like, okay, I guess you think we're worthy to be some sort of guide for you." And I think what quickly became relevant for or like apparent to us is this. We were told, you know, Casey, you need to forgive Megan. And I'd be like, okay, sounds great. I want to forgive her. But no one taught us how to forgive. No one taught us how to walk that forgiveness. Or they'd say, Casey, you need to apologize. Okay, I'm sorry, but that's not the way to apologize. There's actually a 4-step to an apology. So the how is really what we wrestled with because we couldn't find tools out there. Now, and I love the Christian community, but I think a lot of times Christian marriage books can get very theoretical and theological
I
without
agree.
getting very practical.
Absolutely.
And that's where we were at. I was like, I know all this stuff up here. I know
Hmm.
what I need to do. I just don't know how to do it. And I definitely didn't have a model, and I definitely didn't have a guide. And I
Hmm.
think that's where we were supposed to go. There's something else that was really interesting too, Joshua, that thinking about God's expression of love into the world, though for maybe many of your listeners that are in Christian communities or things like that, we probably haven't heard about us because Marriage 365, when we first started, we definitely got the call that this is not to be a Christian, finger quotes here,
Hmm.
Christian marriage ministry, that
Yeah.
this was actually to be a ministry to go outside the walls of the church.
Hmm.
And and that is something that I bristled with early on because I was like, theology, pastor. I'm like, this is what I want to do. I want to talk to people in the church. And that was a forcing function to make us go very practical with our tools because I couldn't just say, hey, Sally and Bobby, like, you guys need to just put Jesus at the center of your marriage. Because I think that was
Hmm.
probably an easy thing to say. But even Christians go, what in the world does that mean? What does that mean?
Yeah.
So you can't throw a Christian platitude at a hurting couple. You have to give them the tools to
Yes.
work through anger and resentment. I'm really pissed
Yes.
off. What am I supposed to do next?
Yes. There is. So I was with a lady this morning, counseling her, and she had just read a book. She's coming out of some healing, just with a narcissistic relationship. And she read a book that was very helpful for her. And she was like, it was great. It was emotional. It gave me, it was just a good read. But then she's like, but life is hard at the same time. And I'm like, yeah, because some things are good to read, but it didn't give you instructions on how to live and to get to those points and all those testimonies with that are in that thing. And that's the beauty of marriage. The beauty of marriage counseling is it's hard to see when you're going through it from both sides of the chair. And that's one thing I tell people, that even though I'm on this side of the chair does not mean that my marriage is perfect.
Oh yeah,
By
100%.
anything. Yes, because there are many moments where I'm thankful that my wife aren't in there, because I have my own marriage sessions where I'm like, oh gosh, oh yeah, that is me. That is that. And she does not need to hear when she's right. We just,
Mhm.
that doesn't need to happen all the time within there. But when you guys are in that mode and trying to look back at yourself, where do you see your testimony being able to reach those that you never thought possible?
Mm. Yeah, well, it's 2020, end of 2024, and obviously we've through COVID we saw a lot of people leave the church.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was a good refinement. Maybe there's a lot of looky loos that probably needed to clear out, so we knew
Mm-hmm.
we weren't like looking at a sea of 1,000 people going, "There's 1,000 committed Christians," when it wasn't. Um, but I do believe that there's a lot of people in our country today that still believe in conservative values. They may just not fully buy into a religious organization, as they would say it. So I think that they understand the direction that we're going. They appreciate that all of our content, by the way, is stolen. We just open up the book of Proverbs, and we basically take Proverbs and then just make it faith neutral. And this ancient Jewish proverb said that words have the power to give life and to give death, and you get to choose. So let's talk about communication, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we pilfer. I believe the book of marriage is the book of Proverbs.
Mm-hmm.
um, and
Yes.
there's something interesting about that concept, because the word wisdom in the book of Proverbs, hokmah, is this concept of like a so when you think about, when you look at a blueprint, right?
Okay.
When you look at a blueprint for a building, you're going to see all the specs, you're going to see the measurements, you kind of see, okay, these beams are holding up this part of the house. You see the house. It's not the house, but you see the house, and there's rules that guide how that house will stand the test of time and earthquakes and tornadoes and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
The wisdom of God is like the divine laws of nature, that when you follow these, goodness comes of that.
Mm-hmm.
That even a person who doesn't believe in God could follow the book of Proverbs and experience the good life,
Mm-hmm.
because they are spiritual principles. Now, my hope and my prayer as we gather weekly to pray is that if someone is taking biblical principles, they're not believers,
Mm-hmm.
or they're not Jesus people,
Mm-hmm.
but they start to apply that into their lives.
Yeah.
It's not my job. It's now on the Holy Spirit to begin softening the soil, softening the heart, of recognizing like, this is good. When
Mm-hmm.
I speak kindness over my wife, this is good.
Yeah.
I experience goodness.
Yes.
And to be good, to do justly, to seek mercy, to live in forgiveness. That right there is soft, fertile soil
Yeah.
for what I would consider saving grace and knowledge of saving grace. I kind of feel like I carry the common grace, right? The common grace of God.
Yeah.
Here's something that blew my mind. Do you realize that Jesus cares about Muslim marriages? Do
Yeah.
you believe that Jesus cares about atheists and their marriages? That he wants goodness for them? See, I think in my worldview, I walked in going, Jesus cares about biblical marriages.
Gotcha.
But that is extremely exclusionary and very probably mostly offensive to anybody that's outside the walls of the church going, oh, so you think you get the marriages? So God loves your marriage, but he hates mine. I'm like, no. And that was a hard hurdle for me to overcome. Like to go, yeah, God cares about Mormons and their marriage too.
Hmm.
People that we would think, well, they don't really think like I think. But yes, yet God's goodness is chasing after them too. And my role is to propagate that and to encourage that and
Yeah.
passionately appeal for that to like, let's learn to live in reconciliation
Yeah.
in the marriage sacrament where the Holy Spirit's going to do his job. So there you go.
Yeah. That goes up. Just finishing up election season here in America. That goes along with one of my strongest pet peeves, I guess you should say, or things with theology with people and Americans is when people think that Jesus is American. And
Yep.
I'm like, you really think this whole world and Jesus and salvation is coming down to the Democrat or Republican Party? That's going to govern me going to heaven. Okay. But anyway,
Yeah. No, it's true. Yeah.
and so, I mean, there's so much division that just can happen. I was just talking to a former colleague of mine as well of how many people we've had come in and couples that have stopped coming or just stopped with anything because they're dealing with the anxiety of who won the presidency. And I'm like, okay, this is America, and this is not, you are need more therapy than we thought. But at the same time, I did want to get you right in
That
there.
breaks my
I
heart.
know we're running coming through, but have from you guys' perspective, have you ever had to coach a, like you said, an atheist or non-believing couple to where faith was something that was not to be brought up? And what was the result of that?
I mean, we work with couples all the time
Yeah.
that are cool in their faith. They're not hot,
There
or
you
they
go.
call themselves Christians, but they don't live that
There you
way.
go. I got you.
I mean that all the time.
Yes.
In
Same here.
fact, Joshua, I I again, maybe this is just the lens. I worked with a couple, and so my wife and I do these things called intensives. These are 2 days, like 8 to 9 hours a day, working with one couple, two on
Yep.
two,
Same here. Yep.
and yeah, and early on, there was this couple that came in, and this was the first time I ever experienced this. The gentleman stood up and said, "Hey, can we all hold hands and pray before we get started?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's awesome." And um, as we started talking, he was so hot and fervent in his faith that when we started to get practical, he actually couldn't get there because he was like, he was too far up in the clouds. And
Mhm.
then what was worse was the wife had recorded his verbal abuse to her. And Joshua, I have never felt so uncomfortable than to hear the violent rage that was in this man's voice,
Mhm.
claiming to be a godly man.
Mhm.
I mean, takes one to know one, maybe. But this was on another level.
Yeah.
And I thought, here's this man that sat here and claims to know Christ and
Yeah.
treats his wife like that. It was such a disconnect. I know that's not your question, but I
No,
think
that's a great perspective.
that's from that point on, I've always, if someone comes in and starts doing like, well, we're good Christians and something, I'm like, whoa, 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 pause. We're going to take that and we're going to put that in a box. We're going to put that off to the side because I just want to know the facts of your relationship, and we can get into
Yes.
spiritual stuff at a certain point. But
Yeah.
when you think about someone's theology, well, there's two biblical principles, and that is to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul. All
Yep.
right. So passionate pursuit of God, whether that's worship, service, devotions, like understanding and knowledge and growing.
Yeah.
And then if you got that one so good, then the second commandment should be really easy because it's to love others as you would yourself. And the first other that sits across that sits on the priority list
Yes.
is your spouse. So that's the disconnect when someone says like I love God with all my heart and soul, and then they
Mm.
treat their spouse like crap, or they're having
Sir,
affairs, or they're having. That's where I go.
sir.
Wait, hold on. That's the theology where God would just say, "I'm stuffing my ears to my ears with my
Mm.
fingers to your prayers. You leave your gift at your altar, and you go figure out your horizontal relationships first, because I don't want to hear it. You claim to love me, and yet you act like this to your spouse." So, anyways, I I I have now a little chip on my shoulder about that because I'm like, I get to hear all the stories. We
Mm-hmm.
see the person with their hands raised in church, but then they
Mm-hmm.
come to me and they share all these stories, and I'm like, that doesn't. How, how is your theology really living out in your life if this is the way that you're living? And now hold on, I heard myself, and I just want to make sure that I don't. I want to caveat that is may sound judgmental. I'm not judging
Mm-hmm.
that behavior. I only question how, if you claim that this I'm passionate about pursuing Jesus, that it will radically show up in your marriage, in the way you serve your spouse, in the way you love them. And so
Mm-hmm.
even with I work with couples that are cool in their faith, I will tell you that one of my favorite stories is a couple came to us. We worked with them. They weren't Christians. They were kind of like post-Christian.
Mm-hmm.
We got them back on track, and I I can get emotional again. So forgive me. But they sent us a picture 6 months later of them getting baptized again at the church,
Mm-hmm.
as they realized as soon as they put their marriage back together that faith was an important component. And that right there was, if that's the only story I get to take away from Marriage 365, it was 100% worth it,
Mm.
because that's the completion. That's the full circle for me,
Yeah.
is pulling someone in, helping with their marriage, and seeing them come back around to their faith. And who knows, maybe there's some other stories out there we'll never hear about, but
Mm-hmm. You're
that's
right,
what gets
man.
me up in the
And
morning.
it's not judgment. The Bible even gives, that's another issue in itself with theology, but just you have that permission. You judge them by the fruits that they bear with it, and love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. All of those are the fruits that believers should have. And as a priest, prophet, and king of a home, you
Mm.
have to be able to know that the words that you're speaking, the thermostat that you're carrying in the home, that's number one thing. Your number one ministry, even if you're a housewife, is your family. And so
Yep.
if they are suffering, I don't care about your 3,000 member church.
Yep.
If she can't go home and feel safe and secure, knowing that you're the husband, the boundaries are in place, the love is there, you're speaking, the words speaking coming out of your mouth should be the words that are coming of God. And if we thought about how we communicate to our people, the words that if we only spoke when God told us to or how he did, we would tread so differently
Mm.
with this life in general,
Yeah.
married or not.
Yeah. Well, and if you're listening to this, maybe this is a good place to just check in and say, how am I showing up for my family? If I claim to be a passionate pursuer of Christ and the things of the kingdom,
Yeah,
the rubber meets the road with in your marriage first. That's like the first
absolutely.
place that it gets lived out.
Absolutely. And I know we're running out of time here, and so I
Yep.
don't want to push the limit
Oh,
right
this was
there.
fun.
It's too much fun with it. I feel like we're just getting started. We need some coffee and a sub or some some wings and some
Yeah.
football to keep us going
Love
with
it.
everything. With that. But thank you so much for your time and being
Yeah.
with us today as well. If people want to reach out to you, how do they contact you guys? What's your give us some information for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, you can find us on Instagram. That's kind of our largest social community, and we post daily reminders of what it means to be married and what does that look like from practical sense.
Yes.
I will say, so we have a book coming out. It's called
Okay.
365 Connecting Questions for Couples. We actually self-published this book about 5 years ago, and we've sold over 100,000 copies.
What?
Yeah, and it's a tool that basically it's a question a day that
Mm-hmm.
sparks conversations.
Mm-hmm.
If couples are bored or looking to spice up their relationship, or if they're hurting
Mm-hmm.
and they just need kind of like safe conversations without talking about pain points, this book becomes kind of the prompt for them to find connection, even in the midst of pain or even in the midst of the busyness of life. And so that goes on sale December 3rd. And we're super excited because Penguin Random House approached us, small little publisher, approached us and said, "Hey, we captured the vision of what you're trying to do, and we want to actually get this in the hands of so many other couples." Now,
Mm-hmm.
call me crazy. I have a goal of selling 10 million copies of this book because
Good.
I want to see this. This is a tool. This isn't like a content piece. This is like
Mm-hmm.
a tool. We were talking about tools, right? A
Mm-hmm.
tool in the hands of couples that provides this connection. And as they connect, the number one way to build emotional intimacy is asking open-ended questions. And so this
Absolutely.
book will help couples get that. So
Absolutely. Guys, please check them out. Marriage 365 online, Instagram. Casey, it was so good speaking with you. We got to do this again somehow.
yes, next time we're
Within
going to talk about sex. Okay, the
something's
biblical
following it.
mandate
Let's
for
go, man.
sex. Yeah, let's
I
do
need
it.
to be satisfied.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much for your time. And we'll be in touch soon, man. Good to see you. I
Awesome.
like this connection. All right.
Dude, that was hilarious. You got me all emotional. I don't usually get emotional on my podcast, but
Yes. Now I'm trying to figure out how to stop recording. No,
and where are you located in the country right now?
I am in Lake Wiley, South Carolina, just like 5 minutes away from Charlotte, North Carolina.
Mm, okay. I love the Carolinas.
Yeah.